Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Kessner. I am the primary host of the Dear Katie podcast, and we are so delighted to have you take this journey with us on our weekly podcast episodes. I just want to remind everyone to do great self-care. Thriving is part of the purpose of this podcast, and we definitely want you to take a break at any time. Warm bath, fresh air, walk a dog, have a bite of chocolate, whatever you need to do good care for yourself. Just as a reintroduction, if you're not familiar with me, I am the woman who was on the cover of Time magazine at age 18 as the first in history to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And HBO made a film about me, and I went on to become the executive director of the Take Back the Night Foundation. We are the oldest, largest global movement on sexual violence in all forms for all people in the world. So we encourage you to visit our website for lots more information. So I'm going to turn it over to our host and our guest for today. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. As you all know, we are on this togetherness journey of survivorship and thriving and healing and finding ways to grow, even when very difficult things come into our lives and maybe stay there for a while. You all are going to absolutely adore our guest today. Amanda Blumenthal has done so much interesting work, especially in the world of coaching and training intimacy on screen, kinds of actor coaching. And we're going to learn all about that. But I always like to say, if anything comes up for you, push pause, come back, take a walk, get a breath of fresh air, eat a piece of chocolate, whatever works for you is always a good way to do self-care. That is essential and important. And if you're listening to the podcast stuck in traffic, I say beat on that wheel, do some snaps, whatever will work again to calm in the space and confines that you're in. So here's a little bit about Amanda, and I can't wait to talk to you. So Amanda Blumenthal is one of the founders of the field of intimacy coordination for film and television. It aims to create safer spaces on set for both performers and the crew members, while also empowering bold and creative storytelling. Amanda comes to this work with a background in sex and relationship coaching, sex-positive queer sex education work, and doing advocacy work for survivors of sexual assault. Amanda is the founder of an organization called Intimacy Professionals Association, which provides SAG-AFTRA. I don't know if those are acronyms I pronounced correctly, but you can fix it for me, Amanda, which is an accredited intimacy coordinator training to global audiences, as well as educational workshops for the film industry on topics related to intimacy work for the screen. She's a sought-after speaker in the field, and she has presented at the Sundance Film Festival, the American Film Market, Film Independent, the Association of Film Commissioners International Symposium, and many, many, many more. So we are so eager to hear from you, Amanda, and learn about how you do all this amazing work. But I always like to know, where are you from? How'd you grow up? This is such a fabulous field. So a little bit of your backstory would help us all know you a little more.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'll just start by saying thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So in terms of how I grew up, I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, born and raised there. I also went to university in California. And so I spent many, many years there. My parents were both filmmakers. So my mom was a line producer for several years. And then after having me and my twin sister, several years after that, she decided, instead of line producing, which is a very demanding job in terms of the responsibilities and the hours and all of that, and also travel, she decided to take a production executive job at HBO. And my dad was an editor. So I grew up around the film industry. Some of my earliest memories are from being on set with my mom. And even I grew up around it, but I always said, and my parents are such film buffs, in a way that is probably not a good thing, because when you're watching a movie with them, all they'll do is like comment on all the things that were done wrong or like that kind of stuff. And
Oh, yeah.
I always said I'll never work in film and television. And of course, what happened is I work in film and television. But the only reason that ended up happening is because of the fact that I saw an opportunity in the industry where there was a lack of safety and care happening around how intimacy scenes were being done. And my interest has always been in human relationships, communication, human sexuality, those sorts of topics. And when I saw that there was the possibility to intersect that work with this world of film and television, which I know very well, it looked like the right opportunity for me to make an impact.
That's totally a brilliant and now easy to follow trajectory. But now I wanted to go back when you were there with your mom and watching all this go down. Um, when you said the lack of, real care and a lot of perhaps exploitative or uncomfortable like what was the landscape? Can you give us some examples of what you saw that needed to be fixed?
Yeah, so I didn't see too much firsthand because my parents kind of kept me away from that side of the industry. But what I did hear were stories, lots and lots
Oh,
of stories, especially from my mom, because when she first started working in the film industry, it was in the 80s, and she started out her career as a production assistant, like the lowest position on the set. She started off her job or her career um, working in low budget horror movies. And in that
wow.
genre, and in that genre in particular, it was like the wild, wild west, especially in the 80s. And they were making lots and lots of projects. And she was working for a particularly famous producer director in that genre. And she saw all sorts of things, and she also met lots of people who worked in the industry as well, who would tell her their stories about like, oh yeah, we called in all these women today and they were all told to like line up and take their shirts off as part of like a casting call. And we now have a name
Oh,
for that, which is called a cattle call, because there's no like need really for producers to see like lots and lots of women lined up semi or completely naked. But it used to be that they could get away with that, and nowadays you can't. SAG-AFTRA, which is the actors union, has all sorts of guidelines and regulations around nudity and simulated sex, including at the casting phase. But back then, there was very, very little. And so we've come a very long way in the industry in terms of protections for performers.
nice. I think that's really oh my gosh, cattle call. It's and I'm just thinking, I mean, unless we're talking about definite pornography, women's tops are not often shown without, a top on it covering. So, why not try them out with what they're going to be wearing in the show?
Yeah.
um, you would think. But so that was did you feel outrage or just like that's like empathy for someone else's body's being exploited, and obviously your she pronoun. Did you have empathy or like worry about, what if I were in that, like how did you feel, or how did you then navigate more into the field?
Yeah, so when I was in college, especially my first year of college, I had a couple of friends who has friends from high school and also new friends from university, who had different experiences around sexual violence and sexual assault on in a campus context, which unfortunately is a very, very common experience in the United States. Um,
Hmm.
and so, because of those experiences of my friends and me being in a position where I was trying to do my best to support them, but I didn't have like the skills or tools to do so, because of that, I started to get involved in the advocacy communities that were present at my university. And I started to learn more about, well, what can be done, how can, we get justice for survivors, and there's many, many challenges that are faced, right,
Right.
if someone decides to
Right.
report. So that's kind of how I got involved in like the advocacy side of things. And I always just wanted to not just like help my friends in those particular situations, but I also just felt like there was like such a lack of protection and such a lack of justice. And
Mm-hmm.
I I remembered all these stories my mom would tell me, and then also the Me Too movement happened in 2017,
Right.
and tons of survivors came forward and were telling their stories about what was happening in film and television. And it just reminded me so much of the experience that my friends were going through, with telling their stories and trying to be just believed, like at like a baseline level, right? And so I felt like there must be something that we can do in terms of shifting the conversation and shifting the culture around how we're approaching these kinds of scenes and how we're talking about it. Because I really do truly believe that the media is a place that can really shift culture. And so it felt to me like a place where the work could really have an impact, not just on the lives of the performers that you're working with directly, but then also the ripple effect that comes with that and the conversations that get had at a national and international level with the press.
Nice. And I couldn't agree more. This and stories and the media is great at telling stories and honoring, lived truths, even told through story, right? Even if it's fiction or a documentary. But that, how. And so let's shift over right to what you're doing and how you did it. You co-founded or founded a couple different things, Amanda. So how did that entrepreneurship happen? But what went into building those definitions, that concept? How hard was it to get uptake on it? And I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. So prior to 2018, intimacy coordination basically didn't exist. There was an equivalent happening in the theater space, which is called intimacy direction. And that's where a lot of the like prototype pioneering work around creating protocols for intimacy and performance were happening, but like nothing was really happening that much in the film and TV space. Like maybe some minor things here and there with like short films and stuff like that. Um, After the filming of the first season of The Deuce for HBO, one of the lead actresses on the project, her name is Emily Mead, went to HBO and said, hey, after the show got picked up for season 2, she was like, hey, I really want to have like an advocate on set when we're doing intimacy scenes, because her character in particular, she was playing, I don't know if there's, I don't know if there's censorship. Am I allowed to say sex worker?
Yeah. Oh my
Okay.
gosh. No, you're fine.
um, I don't know. Sometimes, like, platforms will like censor you, and I was like, I don't want to say anything. We're not allowed to.
No, not this one. We're good.
Yeah. So Emily was playing a sex worker in the show, and she was doing a lot of nudity, a lot of simulated intimacy, and oftentimes with like day players. So like people she had never met before. Like you literally like would meet them on set and be like, okay, you're doing a simulated sex scene with them now, right? And so um, that's a very vulnerable experience for a performer, and she felt like it could like that process could be done better. And she was like, we have stunt coordinators for stunt scenes who help the performers do it safely. Why don't we have someone for intimacy scenes that helps us do it that way as well? And so HBO said, okay, let's try and figure this out. And they found someone in the theater space who was doing intimacy direction, and her name's Alicia Rodas. And they brought her on to help starting to adapt that work to film and TV. And as they were filming season 2, there was another show at HBO that came up called Euphoria. And they were like, this process seems to be going well in The Deuce. Let's try it out on Euphoria. And so that's kind of where I came in. Is I heard about them looking for what they're now calling intimacy coordinator. The name takes its title after stunt coordinators, and and because of my background, um, I was like, no one really knows what this is, right? And it sounded exciting, and I felt like it was a good match for my skill set. And so I sent in my resume, and they called me in
Perfect.
for an interview, and they were like, "We think you're great. You seem like the right fit. You," they're like, "Let's give it a shot." So they hired
You,
me, and
yeah.
on season one is when we started to really like figure out the process and the protocols. And then from there, word started to spread. I was getting a lot of calls for other shows as well. And it got to a point within less than a year where I was like, I can't work on all the shows that are calling. I better start training people. And that's where my company was born.
Yay. And it's based in California. So how did you, well, let's say I'm sure most of our listeners would be keen to hear what goes into coaching. And my personal interest obviously goes back to what I had to try to teach the world, Amanda, which was when I was, time cover story, I literally had to say sexual assault is not just an act of force and violence, it's also simply a lack of consent. And I had to explain, and for our listeners, I don't know that I've defined all these terms on the podcast, but I did define what coercion was versus what seduction, what is incapacitation versus intoxication, what is reasonably knowing about something versus not. Like, and what body parts are considered sexual. What's a sexual touch? Like, I'm fascinated by your work because I tried, like, before you I think I'm thinking you were born right around the time cover story, right? Yes. Yeah, you were born like 1 year after I was on the cover of Time, which is
Yeah.
that's even cool. Like you were being made. You were being made when I was like doing this work. And so it is fabulous to think like I set out when you were being born to try and change the whole discussion, the whole way we talked about intimacy as being okay and legal or illegal and exploitative and ruinous to someone's sense of well deserved personal space.
Yeah.
Intimate as and especially intimate space. So I really want to talk and help our listeners think about that because I think if you and I talk about how you're coaching, some of them are going to find another way to think about what they also went through and why it maybe they didn't have a name for it or maybe they weren't sure if it was violative, but I want to talk about those nuances. And secondly, and we can come back to this when I'll ask the question again, I think ultimately then we could go to, how do you get people to make normative the idea that there's consent? Because even if you're coaching an intimacy, there are certainly movies and TV shows where a rape or a sexual assault happens as part of the show. you know Lots and lots. And so I also think like once we talk about your definitions and how you're doing the coaching and what kind of terms like resonate with the people you're working with, I think it would be also interesting to talk about if you have had experience. I'm sure that's somewhere in that realm of how TVs and movies depict those scenes too, and coach the actors for them. I actually, and then I'll tell you to that end, I helped two actors with a movie only but for like not as good as you by any stretch, I'm sure, because all I did was I talked to the victim about and the perpetrator, the two actors. I talked to them together.
Yeah.
I talked to them together on a Zoom, And I talked about the mindset to help them get in the mindset of the victim and the perpetrator, and what that might, based on what was going on, how that might feel, because she was not a victim in real life, nor was he a perpetrator in real life.
Yeah.
So that was what I did. So let's go back. So I just foreshadowed the whole podcast, but yeah, no, but that way you can also be thinking too. And now, let's go back to like what sort of terminology and like whatever you want to share. I mean, you don't have to teach the whole course here, but like anything that you think our listeners especially would find interesting about teaching boundaries, or teaching, like, is there, what's that word? This is my word I use, my safe word. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that's something you teach, but I think all of those are interesting.
Yeah. So I think intimacy coordination is an interesting field because we're looking at consent from the perspective of workplace, which is
Mm-hmm.
a different conversation than consent in a personal relationship or in our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the way that there's obviously many different types of consent, and one of the things we talk a lot about is that, like, for example, on a very basic level, there's implicit consent and there's explicit consent. Explicit meaning you ask me a question, I tell you yes, no, maybe, or I'll do that if this and this happens, right? We have an explicit conversation about it. There's no unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
Versus implicit consent, which is making assumptions about someone's consent based off of their body language, or the lack of declining to do something or say something, right? Or just like the facts of the circumstances of the situation they're in. They're like, oh, you're in this space, therefore you're consenting to whatever's happening here. Um, and so in our daily lives, implicit consent is something that is happening very frequently. And in many situations it's fine. Like if you're with family members and someone comes and they give you a hug or whatever, like a lot of the times those kinds of things are going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of implicit consent, situations that happen between partners, but the thing is like, the other person really well, and you have rapport, you have trust, you can have conversations, you can tell the other person, hey, I don't like that, right? You're not, I mean, obviously the person could break up with you, but like most likely if that breakup happened, it's like not your livelihood that you're losing. Whereas like in the workplace, it's often very difficult for people to say no to things because of the fact that we have these power dynamics happening of like the director, the producer being able to hire you or fire you. And so in the workplace, implicit consent is not really an appropriate type of consent to be relying on. You really need explicit consent. And on top of that, for legal reasons, you want written consent. So everything is documented, everything is governed by contracts. And so, and obviously there's also verbal consent happening and stuff like that, but they're different situations, different types of consent are at play, and each has its time and its place. But in the workplace, and obviously there's power dynamics in all situations. There's power dynamics in relationships. There's power dynamics between kids and their parents. There's power dynamics between almost everyone, but in the workplace in particular, it's very, very strong, and it has a really big influence on people's saying yes or no to things. And so the other thing with the workplace is that oftentimes we're also looking at, you might not want to do the thing that's being asked of you, especially in intimacy work. Like you might be getting asked because of the character and the role and what you're portraying. You might be getting asked to portray something that you're just not personally interested in. You would never do it in real life. Maybe it really gives you the ick, but you really believe in the story and what it's portraying and all of that. And so you might not want to do it, but you're willing to do it because you believe in the story, you believe in the project, you think it's important. Whereas in real life, or if we're looking at like sexual relationships, Most likely for most people, and I'm not going to say for everyone because some people might feel differently, but for most people, that wanting to do the thing has to be there. And it's not just necessarily always about like being willing to have sex with your partner. Like most people are going to be like, no, the wanting and like the enthusiasm or however you want to call it has to be present or there's no consent. And everyone kind of gets to define like what does that mean to them in terms of like what do the circumstances have to be for consent to be present. I think it's one of those things where it's like it's kind of different for everybody. And that's like a really deep and nuanced conversation, right? Because it also can depend on like, you know, for example, if, with people with like different sexualities, like if you're looking at an asexual individual, an asexual person may be willing to engage in different types of sexual interactions, but they don't necessarily want to, but they're willing to. And, you know, there's all sorts of nuance to that conversation. But the workplace is often more about are you willing to do X, Y, and Z? And so we have a lot of those kinds of conversations. And we also have a lot of conversations with performers about their boundaries. So, what are like their physical boundaries? Because you can't just like you can't check your personal life at the door when you show up at work, right? So, if, for example, you have some kind of personal trauma from the past and you know that being touched in a certain way or being touched on a certain body part or someone using a certain type of language is very triggering or activating for you, then that's the kind of information that we as intimacy coordinators need to know so that we can take preventative steps to try and not have that be present as much as is possible during the prep and shooting of the scene. And so we always map out like what is this person's physical boundaries, where is touch okay, where is touch not okay, and respecting the fact that, you know, on different days people might feel differently about their bodies and what's happening for them, or sometimes people have injuries, right? And so it's like we have to be very conscientious of what their capacity and their limits are. And so, yeah, I think the kind of like the three core fundamentals that we're always navigating as intimacy coordinators are consent, boundaries, and power dynamics, and how those things interact with each other.
Yeah, that was super helpful. I know that was a mouthful for you, but I also really liked explaining the difference between implicit and explicit consent, because that's a little bit of the shift that has happened since you were in college, Amanda, that is like a hotly debated topic right now, because some colleges are still defining consent as being full, verbal only. It has to be clear. It has to be every single step of the way, full, complete sentences, correct, body part naming, no like slogans, slang, no, you know, text shortened acronyms. Like, you could name all of it, but they're saying, is that really doable? Does anyone in real life do that, much less in acting world? So that's explicit consent. And they also say, how you said, well, you might have a partner and this is how you do things, and you've done it in the past, so you kind of have a like mindset. But some of the colleges are saying, like, it doesn't matter. You've been going out for a year and done this 100 times. Every time is a fresh time. So I'm like, I didn't come up with that law or rule, Amanda. I'm the one who said consent is just freely given, mutually understandable. It doesn't have to be every single step of the way, full, complete sentences, but it has to be, reasonable, but not so explicit. So I think that's interesting as well, because some of our listeners, many are college students and high school students, and they might be thinking about what you just said in the context of their own school policy. But I think, yeah, so I just think that's like, I'm so glad you use those two words, like implicit and explicit, because they might be looking at their own handbook and it says like explicit is all we have here.
Right.
And so Yeah, there's a rollback right now, a movement that's going back to, a more general understanding that might be more implicit types of consent or reasonably understood types of consent that might be even silence is okay if that's the norm that you all have established.
Yeah. And I think, and that's an important point, is like, if that's the norm you all have established, because I would always make the argument that, like, if you haven't met this person before and you don't know them, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're
for
really going to
sure.
want to make sure that there's like explicit verbal consent for whatever is happening.
Everything.
And
But yeah,
it's an opportunity for you to learn about them, right? And I think I like this next thing I'm going to say comes from when I was doing sex and relationship coaching. But I think that, like, oftentimes consent, like, and conversations around consent get such a bad rap. And it's like, consent conversations don't have to be like awkward and weird and clinical. Like, they can, like, you can make it sexy. It's just the way that you go about doing it, and you can, like, express your desire for the other person and express the desire for whatever it is that you want to do to them or with them. And that's still consent as long as you're, like,
I
asking.
love that. I love that you said that too, Amanda, because I remember I didn't like do intimacy coaching, but in a way, some of my speeches devolved into that because my audience would be like, "What about this?" I'd be like, and one boy I so remember, I say boy because he was in high school, and he's like, "But talking just ruins the passion in the moment. You can't talk." Um, so I think it's fun, like the intersections between the things you've been doing and the work. And it was so awkward for me, Amanda. I will just say, like, I was so young at 18, like starting to do this education. I was like, oh crap, these cute boys out there and the lacrosse team, like they're asking me embarrassing questions.
Yeah.
And it was just like I just learned to roll with it, and I'm so glad because your confidence, I think, as a woman and in doing this work is just also part of the solution.
Mm.
Like it's good to be you because you're also showing confidence and a way of being great at saying, like, there's nothing wrong with, and affirmations are really important. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of that. You're also giving people the gift of it's okay to be awkward. It's not going to be perfect. You can be funny, a million things. So I love it. So can you give us a more of an example now of, or, not naming names, of course, but anytime like where something went really well and someone was like, oh, I never thought about that, or like, I'm so glad we did that. And then maybe something that was like, oh crap, this is a nightmare. Like maybe a good and a bad, but let's get the bad over first. Like I was like, the bad news first and then the good news. So because I think that might be helpful too, like to know like how things can still get messed up even when you're around. I mean, humans are humans. At least we're not robots, right?
Yeah.
We can never be programmed if we're in person. There's no AI for us
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah. Totally.
Yet.
Yeah. So, you know, there was a scene that happened early on in my career where, depending on the actors that we're working with, there's different ways to approach filming intimacy scenes. So some actors are more improv oriented, other actors really like everything to be choreographed. And usually I'm like, however you two want to work, and if they're completely different working styles, then let's find something that works for both of you. But in this particular scenario, I was working with two performers, and they were like, yeah, well, like, improv, we want to find like the scene. And I was like, okay, great, let's just like have a conversation about like what are the boundaries that we're going to maintain while you're exploring. And we had that conversation, and then they go to shoot for the first take, and one of the performers does something to the other one's underwear that in no universe would I have ever anticipated. And I was like, after we like cut, and I was like, so let's not do that again.
Oh crap.
Yeah, the other person was like completely shaken. I think they're just so surprised that like, I mean, it was very creative, but I was just like, I don't think that was, you know, uh, anticipated or wanted or, you know, in any way part of what this performer signed up for today. So anyway, we had a conversation, and the person who did it was.
Can you tell? I'm now dying to know what happened. Was it a male and a female,
No,
or like same
it was two men.
two?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and one of, I think they were both wearing underwear in the scene, but like one of them that was wearing underwear with like a elastic waistband,
Yep.
and he like snapped the waistband on the other performer. Yeah, he pulled it.
Uh, Chloe,
Yeah, and
that
I
was like
was.
the last strap on the woman. I think that happened to us. Like that was middle school though.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just
It was
want
like
to. Yeah.
a thong snap.
Right. Yeah. No, it was a waistband
I don't know if
snap.
there's an official name for it.
I don't think so. But yeah, he did that. And I was just like, all right, that's different and interesting. And, now I'm going to have to maybe incorporate conversation about the use of costumes into
Yeah,
the
yeah.
boundaries.
Into
Yeah.
well, you live and you learn and you grow your business and like your skill set too. I think that's awesome. I mean, like interesting to think that. And then it brought one more question to my head is how much do you then need to both support the actors, but then go back to the producer or director folks and say, like, does that fit within your imagination of what should have happened? Or are you given total license, or does it just depend?
No,
Like, if,
so
like, yeah, like I'll say it a little differently. Like, if we have an actor who pushes back on that snap thing, but the producer or director is like, no, that's so on par for that character. And the one's like, I don't want to do that. Then what kind of thing happens?
yeah. So we're always trying to work with whatever the director's creative vision is. So there's prep conversations that are had between the intimacy coordinator and the director about what is the director's vision, what are they looking for, all that kind of stuff. So by the time, and then we have conversations afterwards with the performers separately as well. And so by the time we get to
Mm-hmm.
set, we've had lots of conversations about what is this going to look like, what are we doing this on this day, right? And so there's a plan. But when it comes to intimacy scenes, SAG-AFTRA, which is the actors union, requires legal documents called nudity riders, which lay out what the performer is consenting to do on screen, and in terms of simulated sex and the level of nudity. And anything that happens, whether it's intentional or accidentally, that goes beyond what's in the rider legally cannot be used by the production because it's not part of what the performer had consented to. Anything that does happen that is within the scope of that nudity rider is once it's filmed, it becomes the property of the production and the performer can't take it back. But performers are given the right by the union when at any point during shooting, if they change their mind, they're completely allowed to. They're not like contractually required to continue doing something if like they decide to withdraw their consent or they no longer feel safe or comfortable or whatever's happening. And in those kinds of situations, a production could use a body double in their place in order to continue filming, and the body double can't do anything more than what the performer had previously agreed to do. But in these kinds of situations, it's usually the union contracts have laid out exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's really helpful also and empowering to know because, when any of us who aren't on your side of the whole equation are watching anything, it's really helpful to know about the support and thoughtfulness that goes into those intimacy scenes. I know I do. I wanted to ask the other side, like the positive story. So, and then, but before that, could you say what percentage of is there enough pressure where it's like every type of film or TV show with this kind of intimacy would have someone like you available?
Yeah, so in the US, it's it's basically like a requirement at this point. I mean, SAG-AFTRA is very much behind this position. There's language about the use of intimacy coordinators in their last collective bargaining agreement from it's finished this year, and so basically any major television or movie production that you see that comes out of the US or is made by a US production company or a studio, even if they're made abroad, um, it's almost guaranteed that they're using an intimacy coordinator. Same thing with productions coming out of the UK. Not all Australian or New Zealand productions, but most of them. But almost all Canadian productions as well. So most of the English speaking world is pretty covered in terms of using intimacy coordinators on set. And one of the things my company has been really focused on is spreading this work to like non-English speaking countries so that it's not just centralized in like, those couple of film markets, and there's more access so we can help get, this work out to more performers. And so that's something that we've been really focused on in terms of like our training goals and objectives for the last couple of years. And I think at this point we've trained people in more than 20 countries.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's outstanding. So now to the good stuff. Like,
Yeah.
where did something go really, really right?
Um, I think, I think I've had situations where like performers have changed their mind about not wanting to do something. You get there on the day and I'm like checking in with them in their trailer, and they're like, I feel really embarrassed, but I actually don't want to do whatever it is that they had previously agreed to. And they're really worried about how, the director's going to respond or something like that. And so as the intimacy coordinator, it's my job to be like, it's okay. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. And we'll find an alternative solution. And so I think it's usually like in those kinds of situations where I personally find the job really fulfilling because it's really nice to be able to support someone in that way where they feel like they do have an alternative and they don't have to endure doing something they really don't feel safe or comfortable doing. Especially because like at work, like at least in my opinion, I don't think anyone should feel that way at work. And then also with film and TV, like the final product is going to live on past your lifetime. Like once it's out there, it's like out there. And so
Mm-hmm.
I always tell performers, like, if you're not sure, like really consider whether or not doing this is right for you. Because once it's done, it's done. It's out there. You can't take it back. And if you think you're really going to regret it, then it might not be the right thing for you. But some people are like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. And I just want to try. And I'm like, great, we'll support you trying. And, I like to call this like, what is your level of regret tolerance? Because if you have very low regret tolerance and you don't like having regrets and that kind of stuff just like consumes you afterwards, if you change your mind about it, then I'm like, probably not the right choice for you to do the thing that you're not sure about. But if you're like, screw it, I love learning new things about myself, let's give this a try, and I don't care if I regret it later, it's part of my human experience, then I'm like, yeah, that might be a good thing for you to try, and you're going to learn something about yourself by the end of it. So a lot of it is about helping performers understand where they are and kind of look introspectively and understand what is the right choice for them.
Yeah, that's perfect. Amanda, I love that. And so are you, how many are on your team now? And have you trained them all? Like, are you the main trainer?
Yeah, so we have a international training program that we run. I'm the lead instructor for that, and I have a co-instructor who also helps me. And we're actually this year expanding into the live performance space. And by live performance, I mean it's not just theater; it's also going to cover circus and opera and musical performances and dance and all sorts of cool stuff that integrates like performance and intimacy in a live performance space. So we have we're the two main trainers, and I think at this point we've trained over 100 people. We're probably over
Wow.
150. I think I'm underestimating, but we've been training for about 5 years now. Yeah.
Nice. And do you then they all work with you as consultants and you can send them out to different projects?
We actually, well, in the United States right now, we have an agency branch of the company. And so we do help with job placement with some of our US students who have graduated from the program and sign up for the agency. But for the students on international productions, we don't have agency services or job placement services. But, sometimes productions will reach out to us and they'll be like, hey, we're looking for a person in Poland. And we'll be like, here are 5 options, give them a call.
Right.
So we're always happy to help connect productions with intimacy coordinators.
Excellent. Excellent. I guess kind of toward the end of our conversation, it might be interesting to hear about a question I had like asked 20, 30 minutes ago. When you have to work with two people playing a non-consensual situation, is there anything different or um, more challenging about those? And, you know, what does that look like to you?
Yeah. So scenes involving simulated sexual assault, sexual violence, non-consensual interactions, those are kind of like the category of scenes where I don't think it's safe or appropriate to allow performers to improvise. Many other types of scenes, I'm like, we can do that. These kinds of scenes, it's not really okay because of the safety risk that it creates for the performers, especially if there's any kind of like physicality or struggle involved. And also because, these are often very mentally challenging scenes for performers to be doing. And so we want to minimize the possibility of there being any surprises or anything that can go really south really fast, right? Because like when you're
Mhm.
filming, you're watching things happen in real time, and if something goes poorly, all you can do is stop, but and make sure it doesn't repeat. But once harm is done, it's done, right? So with these kinds of scenes, choreography is really important. Making sure that we know exactly what are we going to be doing, whose hands are going where. Oftentimes, if there's struggle or any kind of physicality involved, we'll have a stunt coordinator as well to make sure that all of that is being done in a way that's safe and repeatable for the performers. And then we pay more attention and more care to the mental health of performers, making sure that at the end of the day, they are doing closure practices and whatever that looks like for them to make sure they're leaving the character behind as they go home. And we use safe words like you had mentioned before, in terms of performers being able to tap out of the scene if they need to during filming. And we also try to minimize the number of takes and the number of setups so that they're not repeating the scene 30 plus times, because that's
Mm.
very difficult. The body doesn't know the difference between this being done as make believe versus a real situation. Like the stress response in the body is going to happen regardless. And so we try to really minimize how long it takes to film these scenes for the performers, of course, but then also for the crew members who have to watch, because it can be very, very difficult for the crew members to have to be around these kinds of scenes as well.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Some really basic questions They're small technical ones, and tell me if you're okay answering them. But I always wonder when I've never, unless it's in pornography, I've never seen a movie where they actually show digital or like penetration of any kind. You know what I mean? Like you don't see one actor doing that to the other, but it's alluded to by what they're doing from and possibly really good angles. I assume that that's just camera work, and that kind of um, really intimate violation doesn't happen. It's more, how can we make it look like it's happening? And you help with that too?
Yeah. So, one of the legal requirements that's set by the union for the filming of these kinds of scenes is that all simulated sex acts are simulated. So, it's actually not allowed for performers to perform real sex acts on camera. Like, even if both of them wanted to, it's like that could get the production in so much trouble with the union. And then at that point, it's like you're not making film and television, you're making pornography. And it's like, that's fine, but that's not what we're here to be doing, right? For this particular production. So no real sex acts happen on camera or on set. And then as intimacy coordinators, we help with, giving suggestions of how can we, mask a hand or the way pelvises are happening so that we're not seeing any genitalia on camera, and so that we're hiding the area where simulated penetration might be happening to create the illusion to the audience that something is happening even though it's not. Because performers always have their genitals covered on set when they're performing simulated sex. We use what are called modesty garments. And also oftentimes there's barriers between their pelvises that are made of like foam or other like pillow-like material. And that's to keep their genitals separated for sexual health and safety reasons. We never want performers going directly pelvis to pelvis.
That's good happiness for me to hear. And I had no idea. I had not Googled it.
Yeah.
I had not ever explored the question in too much time or depth, but like, at least now we all know. I feel like, and you're like the real deal. You're the truth. You're not some like, high level performing Google, like you're going to take us to some raw ad to buy some lubricant.
Yeah.
I hate to say, like, I'm sure like half the random things people Google, then all of a sudden it takes you to like things you never thought you needed to buy.
Yeah.
Or no. But my gosh, what a fantastic time I've had talking with you, Amanda. I'm like, it's like, I know I'm like a whole different generation, but I hope it also means a lot to you to know, like, maybe once upon a time when I did this, it made a little wiggle room for you to do what you're doing. And
100%. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, I honor you because you took it. I opened the door a little bit. You're like, here we go. It's wide open. Now it's a double door. We're all going in.
I love that.
Like, yeah, I love it too, because it's like we need even more of these ripples of, whatever you're doing is then going to help. Like, think of all the people you're even empowering just by doing the coaching. Every actor is a human who also has been through their own relationships, and perhaps there's even like little bits of healing that go, happen on set because of your presence or your team.
Totally.
What you're saying is so affirming and reassuring that no, you're going to be fine. We don't have to do this. I think that's awesome. You're the person who's acknowledging their feelings and saying it's fine. And that's so helpful. And all of us need someone to say, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. We'll get through this. So, and I kind of like that for our listeners. It's okay. And we'll get through this, all of us. Even when things are hard, or we've never done them, or we feel awkward about them, or we've never tried them. I guess I said that twice, but anyway, this has been a wonderment to me, and I'm really happy and delighted to host you, Amanda. So, anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, for anyone who's interested in learning more about the profession of intimacy coordination, SAG-AFTRA has a lot of resources on their website. Again, that's the Actors Union in the United States. There's lots and lots of resources related to intimacy coordination there. And then my company's website, Intimacy Professionals Association, also has lots of information. And for anyone who's interested in training and workshops and all that kind of stuff, whether for film and television or for live performance, you can find more info there.
Absolutely. And we'll put those in show notes for our listeners to read more, learn more as well.
Great.
But thank you so much, Amanda. Keep up all the outstanding work you're doing. I'm especially heartened to hear how many more countries you are successfully being acknowledged and welcomed into, because I've been doing some work with India and Kenya, and there are a lot of cultural barriers to the work you're doing.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I think this will air after the Olympics, but I just was reading about the hijabs are not being permitted by the French for their athletes, their basketball, their women. I was like, oh my gosh. But, they say separation, and, I don't know. I just keep going, Amanda, and keep going, listeners. Like, I think even finding, I guess I would also leave one more thing. Amanda, you made this your vocation, your career. And really, your career is one of building respect and comfort for a lot of people. So there are a lot of ways to do things that we're passionate about that can be a career. So, and if it's just a sideline or a side business, there's still lots of ways for our listeners. If you're maxed out, like, how great is it to do like 10 minutes in one day just to help change the world? 10 minutes every day compounds, and we're all making a difference. So keep going together. I always close, Amanda, with this, like, together we are always thriving, surviving together, and we're stronger when we can find hope and healing from each other's journeys. So thank you for sharing yours with all of our listeners, and everyone keep tuning into the podcast. Please share it with your friends, with those around you. Like us, listen, favorite, whatever all the stuff is that you should do. Write great comments. Then we'll keep growing this important work. So thank you. Until another episode.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you again, everybody, for joining another episode of the Dear Katie podcast. I hope very much you found today's episode helpful, empowering, and a way to take another step in that long journey toward healing and supporting those we care about, learning about sexual violence prevention, and also survivor support. For those of you who don't know, again, the Take Back the Night website has tons of great resources, books, self-care options, cool merch. If you're feeling like you need a wearable, we have great t-shirts. Of course, we would love it if you follow along on our free newsletter with news and events going on around the country and even around the globe. And finally, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find our entire community popping up here and there, and recaps of our podcast episodes as well. So together we shatter the silence, and together we end the violence. Take care.